From Rampage Jackson entering the ring as a struggling veteran to Patrick Cote pushing past severe injuries for that TKO win, some of the best fights in the UFC have been comebacks that exceeded all expectations. So here are the UFC's ultimate comebacks where the fighters refuse to quit. And the first fighter we're gonna look at did justice to his nickname, because when Rampage Jackson entered the octagon in UFC 92, he set MGM Grand Arena on fire with his performance. Before this matchup, Jackson had been going through a rough patch after suffering 2 brutal losses to Wanderlei Silva in Pride. He was determined to avenge his defeats and prove that he was one of the best fighters in the world, and Rampage did just that.
Quentin Rampage Jackson gets his revenge via left hook to the jaw. One punch. Everything else was just unnecessary. He was out cold. Look at this, Mike. Torque turns his whole body into it.
The fight was an intense back and forth, with both fighters landing some heavy shots in the opening round. Silva, who had a reputation for his aggressive and brawling style, came out swinging and caught Jackson with some big shots early on. Things were looking tough for his opponent, who was struggling to keep up. But Jackson eventually managed to get away from the constant hits and instead focused on turning the tide in the second round. He quickly started to find his rhythm and began to land some heavy punches on Silva, and with just under a minute left in the round, Jackson landed a perfectly timed left hook that sent Silva crashing to the canvas.
Boom! But a hook. Bam! On the button. And those punches were unnecessary. He was out, but Quentin was amped up. One punch put him completely to sleep.
It was nothing short of dramatic, as the referee immediately rushed in to separate the two. Rampage got a clear TKO victory and proved all his critics wrong. This was perhaps one of the most important moments in his career ever, since it's very rare that veterans can work through their slumps in the UFC. But of course, this wasn't the only time we got to see it. Anderson Silva's clash with Chael Sonnen at UFC 117 was the battle of giants, mainly because at the time of the fight, Silva was the undefeated middleweight champion at the time, whereas Chael Sonnen had a reputation for only being a good trash talker. As the fight was underway, the first round had everyone on the edge of their seats. Sonnen was dominating the ring, and he took Silva down multiple times, landing strikes and maintaining control for the majority of the round. And that pace only continued in the second round. It looked like Chael was on his way to winning a unanimous decision, but with just over 2 minutes left in the round, Anderson finally stepped up. He caught Sonnen in a triangle choke and forced him to tap out.
Trouble! Can he choke out Chael Sonnen? Dan Anderson Silva!
He's got his legs across. He's done it!
Unbelievable! Anderson the Spider Silva,
securing the victory and retaining his title, as the crowd cheered in disbelief. One moment he was on the ground taking a beating, and the next moment he was up. Any other fighter would have lost hope after that brutal first round. This just goes to show Silva's resilience and ability to finish fights from any position. It also solidified his status as one of the greatest fighters in UFC history. And to this day, this fight is still analyzed by fans and critics. It goes without saying that UFC veterans are just built differently. I mean, just look at the rematch between Frankie Edgar and Gray Maynard at UFC 125. When Edgar first faced up against Maynard in 2008, he didn't have the best experience. It was his first professional loss, so by the time they faced off again at UFC 125 in January 2011, Frankie had a point to prove. The athlete from New Jersey fought like his life was on the line, and knowing who his opponent was, that was probably true. Maynard won the first round by dropping Edgar with a left hook, causing him to stumble and roll all over the octagon. Fans get to see firsthand why they call Maynard the Bully.
the 12th round of competition between these men.
And you hear Gilbert, his boxing trainer,
Now, Edgar still tried his best and even managed to knock him to the ground twice during the round, but his attacks just weren't powerful enough to cause any real damage to him. When the second round began, it looked like Frankie had finally woken up. He gave it everything he had as he fought back and scored hits, and finally turned the momentum in his favor when he picked up Maynard, slamming him to the ground. The two fighters traded blows and takedowns for the rest of the match, while fans sat on the edge of their seats wondering who would throw the final blow. In the end, both boxers proved to be too good.
Got out of the way of the counter.
A dominant first round by Maynard, not as dominant as he was on January 1st. Another good round for Edgar, the champion.
And despite Maynard winning the crucial opening round by a score of 10-8, the fight finished in a draw. Fans saw Edgar successfully defend his title in one of the most intense matchups yet. But even then, the stakes weren't as high as they were during UFC 154, where Patrick Cote faced off against Alessio Sequeira on November 17, 2012. The fight was a big deal for Cote, since he just returned to the UFC after being released in 2010. Plus, he was also coming off a loss in his previous fight. The Predator started the fight aggressively, but was soon caught by Sequeira's punches and quickly knocked down. And the Italian fighter took it a step further by giving Patrick an intense beating while he was on the floor. It looked like the fight would be over soon, but suddenly, Cote managed to get back to his feet and stun Sequeira with a counterpunch. What followed was a flurry of punches that knocked the Italian out cold. It was a comeback like no other, especially considering everything Patrick had to go through to land the fight. That said, while I'm on the topic of veterans with a successful comeback fight, I have to mention Ken Shamrock's fight against Tito Ortiz. These two fighters had a heated rivalry leading up to the big night. Ortiz was a much younger fighter who was in his prime, while Shamrock was already in his mid-30s, so their clash started very predictably. Ortiz dominated Shamrock on the ground, landing heavy punches and elbows, and anyone could tell that his opponent was struggling to land major blows. In the first round, Shamrock was knocked down twice, and it looked like Ortiz was going to finish him quickly. But the world's most dangerous man pulled it together and got through the first round. And by the time the second round started, there was a change in his mentality. Ken immediately went on the offensive, and he landed a huge knee on Ortiz's body. He then followed up with a barrage of punches that left Tito defenseless. The referee had to step in and stop the fight, giving Shamrock his much-deserved win. The result of this fight was a huge upset, and it was the first time that Ortiz had been knocked out in his career. And while it deserves its spot as one of the best comeback wins in the UFC ever, it's got nothing on the Pat Barry and Czech Congo fight in 2011, because that was the most thrilling fight ever. Congo overcame not one, but two horrific knockdowns to earn a decisive knockout victory, though he didn't do it before taking a beating. Barry knocked the Frenchman to the ground with a looping right hand, then rushed on him with multiple punches. Every time Congo tried to stand back up, he'd be pushed down once more with a crushing right hand. But we got to see him pull off an incredible chicken dance before unleashing a desperate uppercut that secured the win. The crowd went insane as Barry hit the ground, and I doubt fans will ever get over this fight. Well, there you have it. These were the UFC's ultimate comebacks where the fighters refused to quit.